Creating a sense of depth of distance can be an important part of an architectural or street scene. But a sheet of paper is only 2 dimensions. It has no depth. So we want to create the illusion of depth in what we draw. In this inkline drawing, I've used a number of techniques to create a sense of receding distance of depth, which I will explain and demonstrate as I draw a second example. This is a similar street scene, which I drew for the purpose of explaining perspective. I chose not to use these techniques and to focus on the perspective. That while this is a nice, accurate drawing, it lacks the feeling of trailing distance that the other drawing captures, that we find in this street scene. But of course, depth isn't just something which occurs towards the centre of a scene or off to one side, as in this drawing of the Queen Victoria building in Sydney. Depth can also occur looking downwards, as in this view onto the streets of London from the dome of St Paul's Cathedral. Depth is also something we can need to create looking upwards, as in this view of the beautiful facade of the Russell Hotel in London, looking up from street level. Hi, I'm Stephen Travers. Drawing from photos adds a particular challenge to creating depth. We see in 3 dimensions because we have 2 eyes, and each eye has a slightly different viewpoint, and our brain combines those 2 slightly different images to create a feeling of depth. Now, a camera is, if you like, a single eye, and so it doesn't do that, which is why photos can often look very flat, with the various depths of field going back, all looking as though they've been brought forward and compressed together. And the detail from far away is often just as great as the detail that's very close. But one of the great advantages we have as artists is we get to work out what depth there really is there, and to put it back into our drawing. We can create the illusion of this depth, and that's what this video is going to show you. So let's look at our reference photo. Here's our reference photo. Looking along the front facade of the National Gallery in London, I look for 3 planes of depth, although there may not be all 3 in any particular scene. I think in terms of foreground, midground, and distance. And I draw each of those 3 planes with a different mindset. So when I look at this scene, is there an obvious foreground? Is there an obvious midground? And is there an obvious distance? Foreground is obviously the things closest to us. This section of the National Gallery is, the question is, where will I stop the foreground? So this protruding element of the building here is clearly foreground. Do I take the foreground down to here, say, or do I finish it here? And in looking at this, I think I'll get a stronger sense of depth if I actually finish it here. I'm viewing this part as foreground. If I look at this, I can see that this lamppost is actually grounded in a spot that brings it into our foreground. So this lamppost is foreground, and therefore basically all the people in the crowd in front of that lamppost are foreground, which is really those people. So they're our foreground elements. So then I need to consider, where is my midground and where is my distance? It all depends on how you decide your scene is going to work best. But in looking at this, there seems to be a fairly obvious division of midground and distance with this portico here. And so the central dome and the portico are going to be in the midground. And again, there'll be some of this crowd behind will be midground, and the further section of the crowd will be distance. Everything else is distance. The only thing I'm left wondering about is this building to the left. It's looking actually closer, and so I'm thinking this is actually going to be midground as well. So there I have it. And in this case, it is almost thirds: foreground, midground, distance. That is just coincidence. Just to note, there can be elements of foreground on either side, of midground on either side, and of distance of either side. It's up to you as the artist to work it out. So let's start to draw it. I'm going to start in drawing the foreground with a 0.3 millimeter fine liner. In this case, it's a Copic multi-liner. I use a thicker line for the closest part of my drawing because that will help make it look closer. because we see closer things more strongly, more clearly. So it's trying to create artificially the effect of depth that we see in real life. I remind myself before I start that I'm going to use this 0.3 fine liner for this section of the National Gallery that's closest, for this lamppost, and for these people down the front. However, I'm going to swap this photo now for one that doesn't have those sections marked out, so I don't find them distracting. Now I'm drawing this directly in ink without using a pencil under drawing. As I always do with a freehand drawing, I look for my first section to start drawing carefully so I can use it to reference the rest of my drawing. And in this case, it's, I think, for me, a fairly easy choice of this pillar here. Since this is one of the closest sections of the building, there's a little more detail being shown. And there has to be a little more care to keep things accurate. But most important is to get these perspective lines correct. These first lines that we draw will set the stage for where these lines angle through our whole drawing. So particularly for the upper and lower lines, we need to get them right. So I continue the architectural details with the cornice on top of the entablature. And again, I deliberately show a little more detail more carefully with this section so that it'll help it to look closer. This right-hand section also has the most extreme perspective angles in the drawing. So it's important to get them right, and you can see my method of using my pen to measure the angle. It's important to get the extremes correct because they set the limit for where our perspective is, and they also help create a good deal of the visual drama in a scene. So top and bottom perspective lines carefully drawn. The next is to put these windows on the right-hand wall. It's easy to get their perspective lines correct because I've got the lines above and below that I've already established carefully. The most important thing is to simply align them directly above and below each other. After that, I need to position this railing in the lower section of the drawing. It's really important again to get this correct. It's a very strong visual element, so if it's in the wrong place, it will stand out. But it also gives me a very important opportunity to establish the foreshortening with these heavier rails, to have them spaced so that they actually get closer and closer together the further away they are. And the same effect with the lighter rails between them, that as they get further away, they get closer together, but also lighter. Again, I'm not counting, I'm not measuring, I'm creating that effect. Then with this balustrade up the top, also another extreme perspective line to measure carefully. And when I draw the balusters, I'm really drawing the pattern of the shadows. In drawing this tower, I position it over the top of the elements as per the reference photo. That helps me get it in the right place. With these panels, with their decorative lattice work, I just draw the effect. I'm not trying to draw the detail, but I want to get some detail so it looks closer. I draw this dome in two sections, which breaks the shape down for me and makes it easier. Now, of course, we remember in our original drawing, this lamp is foreground as well. So it needs the 0.3, as do these people. But I don't want to draw them yet till I establish some more of the building. And particularly with this lamp, I want to make sure I get the size of it right. That will most easily be done if I can compare it against the height of this section. So now to draw this mid section, I'm going to switch from my 0.3 to my 0.2 multiliner. Now for the midfield. So using a finer line to get a slightly lighter effect in this part of the building to create the effect that it's a little bit further away. Now again, the important thing is to get the foreshortening accurate because that's also very important in establishing distance. So I don't want to let this space here become too large. If I'm going to make a mistake with foreshortening, it's better to foreshorten too tightly than not enough. The part of the building that's in the midground is really quite a lengthy section. So this closer part of the midground building, I'm using the 0.2 millimeter fine liner to give it a lighter effect, although I'm still drawing about the same amount of detail as I've drawn in the foreground. When I move to the second half, the further section of the midground, I'll then use the lighter pen but also less detail. Now it's time to draw the part of the building that's in the further part of the midground. I'm still using the 0.2mm pen, but I'm drawing this with a lighter touch in regards to how much detail I show. So a few more balusters, I continue this lower perspective line, but taking more care with the accuracy of it. And then it's time to bring the portico out from the building. I don't want to bring it out too far, so I'm not just drawing the columns, but I'm actually drawing the spaces between the columns. And in fact, between the column that we can see on the far side of the portico, between two of the others. This all gives me a way of checking my spacing as I go, because I'm drawing, if you like, double the objects, the columns, the spaces between the columns. And then it's just the dome on top, and I put the dome on, and I take a little care with the ribs to put them in the right place, because they really help define the shape of the dome. So I think already, we do have this sense of this drawing moving back in space. There is a lighter touch up here, which I think is assisting that. I'll push ahead and do this section with my 0.1 pen now. And again, I'm wanting a lighter touch. One of the things I'll do first off is I will establish this headline here, because I don't want to bring anything down past where the crowd's going to be. It's important that we don't confuse drawing with a lighter touch with drawing less accurately. In some ways, because we're drawing less detail, inaccuracies show up more clearly, particularly inaccuracies with the perspective. I use my 0.3mm pen to put this lamppost in, because I can now align it with the details on the right hand side of my drawing. Then I use my 0.2mm pen to do that building that was in the midfield on the left hand side. And then I slightly reposition this tower block so that it doesn't overlap with the lamp. So now we want to move to our foreground, back to our 0.3. I start with using my 0.3 pen to draw some of the closest heads in the foreground. I then use my 0.2 to draw some of the people in the midground, and then my 0.1 to draw some of the people in the furthest distance. It's important to establish the sense of scale. Scale is often the biggest weakness in drawings of crowds like this, where the people don't relate to the buildings around them very accurately. The other important thing is to get a sense of random scattering of people. We need to leave gaps. It can be very hard to draw random. We want to create patterns, and we want to fill in all the gaps as we go. So make sure we preserve gaps between people. We've been trying to create particularly a sense of depth, of distance in our drawing. We've been trying to get a sense of there are things closer to us and things further away with this view of the National Gallery in London. And we've done that by using 3 different weights of line, 0.3mm, 0.2mm, 0.1mm, for the foreground, the midground, and the foreground, the distance. But we've also seen that we've drawn more detail in the closer things and less detail as things get further away, until in the distance we're really just suggesting detail. This video has concentrated on creating a sense of depth just using line, but we can add tone to further the effect of depth. And I'll use this drawing in another video to show you how we can add tone to our line in a way to strengthen the feeling of depth.